Gary Hilton was a name that once meant nothing, but to those who survived his darkness, it now echoes like a curse. Raya Delmore, the only victim who ever lived to tell the tale, still wakes up from dreams of the forest, where silence was never safe and footsteps always meant death. He wasn't a drifter. He wasn't lost. He was exactly where he wanted to be, deep in the heart of the woods, hidden behind the trees, hunting in plain sight. What began as a search for missing hikers would soon unravel into one of the most chilling manhunts in modern true crime history. This is Psycho Killer, Interview with a Killer, S2E1, Gary Hilton. The story of a predator who turned the forest into his hunting ground and left behind a trail of silence, fear, and bones. In the heart of Georgia's Appalachian wilderness, a hiking trail called Widow's Hollow stretched across dense forests, quiet rivers, and steep ravines. It was a favorite spot for adventurers looking to escape city life, but the beauty of the landscape hid something sinister. Over 6 months, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Solo hikers were vanishing without a trace. 4 people, all experienced and well-prepared, had set out on the trail but never returned. Their phones last pinged in the same area near mile marker 4, and all had logged plans to be back within a day or two. None of them were seen again. The local sheriff's office initially treated the cases as unrelated. Maybe someone fell, or got lost, or encountered a wild animal. It wasn't unheard of. But whispers began to circulate in the nearby towns. Locals, especially older residents, talked of a strange feeling they got when near that part of the trail. Some said they wouldn't go near Widow's Hollow at all. Not for camping, not for fishing, not even during daylight. Most dismissed. It is superstition, a product of old mountain tales passed down through generations. The case finally gained serious attention when a park ranger named Ellis Munn stumbled upon something deeply unsettling. While doing a routine check of the trail, Ellis noticed an area where the dirt looked freshly disturbed just off the path near mile marker 4. Curiosity got the best of him. When he began to dig, expecting perhaps a buried animal or someone's lost gear, he unearthed a moldy, torn hiking backpack with a blood-stained strap. Inside were a shattered camera lens, a broken GPS unit, and an ID belonging to Margot Elson, a well-known wildlife photographer who had gone missing 3 weeks earlier. Margot was not an amateur. She had traveled to dangerous terrains all over the world and knew how to handle herself in the wild. Her disappearance had raised concerns, but nothing had been found until now. The discovery of her bag changed everything. Police sealed off the area, and forensic investigators were called in. They collected soil samples, scanned the ground with metal detectors, and began combing the woods inch by inch. Blood samples on the strap matched Margot's DNA, but there were also traces of 2 other individuals. These samples did not match any of the known missing hikers, deepening the mystery. Search teams expanded their operation, focusing on a wider radius around mile marker 4. They found broken branches leading deeper into the woods, signs someone had been dragging something heavy. At first, they feared they'd find bodies. Instead, they found silence. The kind of silence that made the air feel heavier. It was as if the forest itself was hiding something. Dogs brought in to track scents, often stopped short in one area and refused to go any further. Several searchers reported headaches, dizziness, or an overwhelming sense of unease in that same zone, though nothing physically unusual was ever found. A few days later, while checking one of the ravines for signs of human remains, a cadaver, dog barked madly at a pile of rocks near a stream bed. Beneath it was a shredded piece of cloth, and more blood. Again, human, and again, not matching any known profiles. Despite the growing list of strange findings, the authorities had no suspect, no motive, and no real idea of what they were dealing with. The media began calling the trail the vanishing path. Pressure grew on the sheriff's office and the state's Department of Natural Resources. Some pushed for the trail to be closed entirely, but others argued there wasn't enough concrete evidence to justify that. Still, something clearly wasn't right. The public began speculating wildly. Theories ranged from bear attacks to serial killers to illegal hunting operations gone wrong. But nothing explained the blood, the missing people, or the fact that it was all happening in the same narrow stretch of forest. It was as if Widow's Hollow had opened its jaws and swallowed people whole, leaving behind only scattered clues, bloodstains, broken gear, and a growing sense of dread. The truth was still out there, waiting in the dark spaces between the trees. And it was far worse than anyone imagined. Just a week after the discovery of Margot Elson's bloodstained backpack, the forest gave up another secret, one far more disturbing than a missing bag. A specialized search team, now operating under federal supervision, had begun mapping out a dense, unfrequented section of the Widow's Hollow Trail that veered off into the southern ridge. This area wasn't on the official trail maps, but overgrown footpaths suggested someone had been moving through it regularly. A group of agents, armed with thermal imaging drones and cadaver dogs, made their way into the dense brush. The dogs quickly became agitated near a narrow slope leading down to a hollowed clearing. There, they found the remnants of a makeshift campsite, almost invisible from above. At first glance, it seemed deserted. But as they moved closer, the horror unfolded. In the center of the site was a metal fire pit, filled with blackened, half-burnt logs, but something else was mixed with the ash, small, brittle bones. At first, it was unclear if they belonged to animals or something else. A forensic specialist on site took one look and confirmed the chilling truth. The bones were human. Nearby, two more disturbing objects were discovered: a coil of nylon rope, stained with something dark and sticky, and an animal trap retrofitted with sharpened metal spikes. Whoever had lived in this camp was not simply a wanderer or a survivalist. This was someone who hunted. Further inspection of the site revealed a rusted toolbox buried under a slab of flat stone. Inside it were knives, a bottle of industrial-strength cleaner, and most chillingly, a stack of old Polaroid photographs. The photos were all of people, young, middle-aged, male and female, all standing or sitting in the forest, looking confused or frightened. Some were bound. All were alone. Every photo had been stamped with a red marker on the bottom corner. A date followed by the word departure. None of the victims had the same date, and none of them had ever been reported as having returned. Investigators recognized at least two of the faces. One was Margot Elson, the photographer. The other was Devin Lohr, a 32-year-old from North Carolina who had disappeared in March. Fingerprint testing on the photographs yielded a breakthrough. The prints matched a man named Gary Hilton, a known drifter with a history of minor offenses, ranging from trespassing to illegal camping. His background was sparse, with no family contacts or fixed address. Over the last 15 years, Hilton had lived entirely off-grid, moving from state to state, often staying in forests, national parks, and abandoned cabins. On paper, he was nearly invisible. Investigators started combing through old park entry, logs, gas station security footage near trailheads, and ATM withdrawals in remote areas. They found something chilling, a pattern. Hilton had been within 50 miles of every disappearance, often checking into local ranger stations, sometimes even volunteering as a guide for new hikers. In one instance, he had signed into a trail registry using a fake name just 2 days before a woman vanished. He had always flown under the radar, blending in with outdoor communities, appearing helpful and harmless. As they dug deeper, they learned that Hilton used different aliases depending on the state. He posed as a nature expert, even claiming to have worked for the Forestry Service in the early 2000s, a claim no agency could confirm. What they did find, however, were several reports from campers across multiple states describing encounters with a strange, older man who asked intrusive questions about their travel plans, often offering unsolicited help and insisting they stay on the trail. These reports were never taken seriously at the time. Now, they painted a terrifying portrait of a man who had been lurking in plain sight for years. The campsite became a crime scene unlike anything the small Georgia town had ever witnessed. A full excavation was ordered. Soil was sifted, charred. Remains were cataloged. DNA testing began. So far, the bones were confirmed to belong to at least 3 individuals, none of whom had been previously connected to the case. For investigators, this wasn't just a missing persons case anymore. This was a serial killer's hunting ground, and Gary Hilton wasn't just a suspect. He was likely a predator who had been operating under their noses for decades. With the disturbing discovery of the campsite and the burned remains, the investigation shifted from missing person searches to a full-scale manhunt, but law enforcement wasn't chasing just a name anymore. They were chasing a methodical, ritualistic predator, Someone who planned his crimes, left minimal evidence, and used the vast wilderness as both a shield and a stage. In an effort to learn more about Gary Hilton's behavior, investigators retraced his movements over the past year. Alongside that, a new team was assigned to examine places where he might have lived or hidden out during his time off-grid. That's how they found the cabin. High in the Blue Ridge Mountains, about 60 miles north of Widow's Hollow, was a long-abandoned ranger's cabin. Overgrown with vines and nearly swallowed by the forest, it had no electricity or running water. But there were signs someone had lived there recently. Old food wrappers, worn boots, and fresh footprints in the dirt. Inside, the walls were covered in dark stains, some of which turned out to be dried blood. But the most revealing discovery was found under a loose floorboard, a weathered leather-bound notebook, its cover marked with a crudely drawn symbol, 2, intersecting branches crossed over a skull. The notebook, once opened, became the case's darkest revelation yet. Titled My Forest, My Rules, it was a handwritten journal filled with detailed entries that chronicled Hilton's movements, thoughts, and most horrifyingly, his kills. Each entry was structured the same way: location, date, and a description of the victim. The writing was precise, emotionless, like someone documenting an experiment. He never used the names of the victims, only short identifiers like Red Pack, Blue Tent, or Camera Girl. But the dates aligned perfectly with the known disappearances. There were more than 10 entries. In the margins of each page were tally marks, like a scoring system. Some had 1, others as many as 5. Investigators believed these represented how long the victim survived before being killed. The longest tally count was 8. Most were 2 or 3, but it was the final entry that left everyone in shock. It simply read, Raya Delmore, not finished. No missing person report matched that name. No hiker under that name had ever checked into any nearby trail. At first, they thought it might be a fantasy or a coded name for an intended future victim. But as agents looked through local bus records, one name came up. A ticket purchased just 10 days ago by a woman named Raya Delmore. Her destination? A small town near Widow's Hollow. She had no family locally and hadn't checked into any lodging. According to the bus driver, she was traveling alone, carrying a small green backpack. Now the case was no longer only about victims from the past. Raya Delmore could still be alive, or she could be Hilton's latest kill. With urgency rising, search parties were deployed along nearby trails. Heat maps, drones, and canine units scoured the forest in every direction. No trace of Raya was found. But deep in one of the side valleys, a park ranger noticed something odd, a narrow hill that looked like it had been disturbed. The soil was uneven, as if something had been dug into the side and then concealed again. When the ground was cleared, a wooden hatch was revealed, buried under leaves and brush. It led into a hand-dug underground shelter. Inside the shelter was a small cage, a thin mattress, and an old lantern. Food wrappers and water bottles were scattered across the floor. Human hair was found stuck to the bedding. A small piece of torn clothing was also discovered. It matched the description of what Raya was wearing when she boarded the bus. But the shelter was empty. Hilton was gone. And Raya, if still alive, was out there somewhere. The journal had opened a door into the mind of a man who didn't just kill. He hunted, observed, and recorded his crimes with cold precision. He believed the forest belonged to him. And in his twisted reality, those who entered his territory had to follow his rules or become part of his story. The search for Raya Delmore consumed everything. What had begun as a pattern of strange disappearances had escalated into a race against time. Federal agents, state police, volunteer searchers, and even military tracking units flooded the forest surrounding Widow's Hollow. Every ravine, cave, and abandoned path was checked, mapped, and cleared. But Gary Hilton knew the land better than anyone. He had lived in those woods for decades. He had memorized terrain, hidden paths, and escape routes no map could reveal. The forest was his world, and inside it, he moved like a ghost. A break came on the 6th day of the search, when surveillance footage surfaced from a gas station nearly 80 miles west of the trailhead. The timestamp was just 2 days prior. On the grainy footage, a tall, thin man wearing a camo jacket and hat purchased a small pack of supplies and left in a rusted green van. Investigators recognized him instantly, Gary Hilton. But more importantly, in the background of the footage, just visible through the rear window of the van, was a flash of movement. A person, sitting, still. They traced the van's direction westward, issuing an all-points bulletin. It took another 24 hours before the vehicle was spotted again, parked deep in the woods near an unused Firewatch Road in Alabama, nearly 200 miles away. When a tactical team arrived, the van was empty. Inside, they found maps, a rifle, several survival tools, and a bloodied shirt stuffed into a corner. But there was no sign of Hilton, or Raya. By now, the case was national news. Networks ran nightly segments, calling Hilton the forest predator and the psycho killer of Appalachia. Public fear grew. Hikers abandoned trails, campsites emptied. The governor issued a temporary closure of several national forests, while the manhunt expanded across state lines. But Gary Hilton wasn't running in panic. He was following a plan. Inside the van's glove compartment, officers found a second notebook, smaller than the first. It was titled Exit Paths. It listed various escape locations, some crossed out, others marked with symbols. One symbol appeared repeatedly, a triangle with a dot in the center. It matched a crude carving found days earlier on a tree near the underground shelter. Investigators believed these symbols were part of a personal code, Hilton's own navigation system. Following the notebook's clues, searchers focused on 3 likely areas, all within the Chattahoochee National Forest. During an aerial scan of the third site, a drone operator noticed smoke, thin and rising steadily from a point deep within the forest. Teams moved in fast. As they neared the smoke, they found a clearing where the remnants of a fire were still glowing. And not far from it, tied to a tree with a nylon rope, was a figure, barely conscious, dehydrated, but alive. It was Raya Delmore. She had been held in the woods for over a week. Her hands were bound, her clothes torn, and her skin bruised from exposure and restraint. She was barely able to speak, but managed to whisper one name over and over: Gary. Medical teams flew her out immediately, and forensic teams locked down the area. No sign of Hilton was found at the scene, but nearby, buried under a fallen log, they found one last notebook, completely blank except for the final page. Written in small, sharp letters was a single sentence. She was supposed to be the last. This chilling line sent a wave of unease through everyone involved. Was Raya meant to be his final victim, or was this part of a twisted performance? A signature left to deepen the fear? The question haunted the investigation. A statewide alert was reissued. Hilton had left behind everything: his shelter, his van, his tools, but he had not left a body. That meant one thing. He was still alive, and he was somewhere out there, watching the chaos he had created. The public wanted justice. The investigators wanted answers. And as more officers joined the hunt, one terrifying possibility became clearer by the day. Gary Hilton didn't plan to disappear forever. He planned to return. Because to him, the forest wasn't just a hiding place. It was home. Gary Hilton's name became legend, whispered with fear across the hiking community, broadcast through television screens, and stamped into the psyche of an entire region. After the rescue of Raya Delmore, he vanished like smoke. No sightings, no new evidence, no mistakes. It was as though he had melted back into the wilderness he knew so well. But law enforcement refused to give up. This was no ordinary fugitive. Hilton wasn't hiding from justice out of fear. He was stalling, waiting, watching. The FBI launched a specialized task force combining experts in survivalist behavior, criminal profiling, and environmental psychology. Their goal was simple: predict Hilton's next move. They created a digital model of the forests he frequented, cross-referenced with the entries from his 2 notebooks and older cold cases across 5 states. That model revealed something startling. Hilton wasn't just operating randomly. His movements formed a pattern, a wide, looping route through forest systems that intersected with remote trailheads, abandoned fire towers, and seasonal ranger posts. It was a silent circuit, one he had likely followed for years. In a bold move, the task force decided to go on the offensive. They placed decoy camps along likely paths Hilton might revisit, equipped them with cameras and motion sensors, and deployed plainclothes officers dressed as hikers to roam key points along the circuit. Days turned into weeks. Nothing. Then, in mid-October, during a cold snap that blanketed much of North Georgia, one of the sensors was triggered. In a remote zone of the Pisgah National Forest, footage captured a lone figure approaching one of the bait camps just after midnight. He didn't take anything, didn't break in. He just stood, watching, as though analyzing. When he finally stepped into clearer view, the profile was unmistakable. It was Gary Hilton. A unit was dispatched immediately, but by the time they arrived, he was gone. However, he had made a mistake. A single thread from his jacket had snagged on a nail near the tent. DNA confirmed it was his. It was the first confirmed sighting in over 2 months. Agents poured into the Pisgah region, coordinating with local authorities, setting up checkpoints and combing through every logging road and stream bed. On the 5th day of the search, they found what they were looking for: another hidden camp. This one was different, more primitive, almost desperate. It was clear Hilton had been injured. Bloodstains on a rag, signs of infection, and torn clothing suggested he wasn't doing well. He had likely run out of supplies, maybe even fallen ill. What they didn't expect to find was a cache of items wrapped in an old tarp. 10 more photographs, similar to the ones discovered earlier. Each was of a different person. Not all were confirmed missing, but 5 matched open missing persons cases from various states. Cases no one had ever linked to Hilton. These were earlier kills, possibly from the start of his spree. It confirmed what some investigators feared. Gary Hilton wasn't just a drifter who'd snapped in the woods. He had been doing this for a very long time. Then suddenly, everything changed. A hiker called 911 to report an injured man limping along a backcountry road near the Tennessee border. He was bleeding from the leg, thin, and barely able to stand. Rangers arrived first, and as they approached, the man collapsed into the leaves. It was him, Gary Hilton. He was captured without a fight. During his interrogation, he said almost nothing. He refused to answer questions, refused to show remorse. He simply stared forward, smiling faintly, as though proud. The only thing he ever said to the lead agent was, "The forest took care of me. It always does." Gary Hilton was charged with multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, and attempted homicide. The details of his crimes were so severe that his trial was expedited. In court, he showed no emotion. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The media dubbed him the Forest Stalker, but survivors like Raya Delmore knew the truth. He wasn't just a killer. He was a predator who saw the wild as his kingdom and humans as nothing more than prey. Even behind bars, Gary Hilton remains silent. He refuses to speak about his motives, refuses to explain the meanings behind his notebooks, and never admits guilt. And that silence, calculated, eerie, leaves only one question echoing through the woods he once called home. How many more victims are still out there, waiting to be found?